The board determined that the applicant's proposed use is not a gasoline service station as contemplated by the Moscow zoning code. Instead, the applicant's proposed use is either a repair shop or an automotive garage and would be a permitted or conditional use in other zoning districts, but not in the central business zoning district. The owners of Erber Auto filed for a letter of appeal to the City Council on February 22nd, 2017. Community Development noticed the appeal before City Council as a public meeting to inform the public and to clarify that the council shall not act on an appeal which differs materially from that which was considered by the Board of Adjustment. When considering the merits of an appeal, no additional public testimony or information shall be taken or considered by the City Council. Again, as Gary mentioned, the council action, after considering the record and the reasons for the appeal, sustain the decision or reverse the decision or amend the decision back to the Board of Adjustment or take the other actions as deemed appropriate. And I'd like to entertain your questions at this time.
Okay, Ryan, before I start talking to counselors who are asking them, so out of the 7 criteria of the Board of Adjustment, was criteria 1 was the one that they could not accept. All other 6 criteria were met.
That is correct.
Is that correct? Okay, I'll start with Jim. Jim had a, and then go down the line.
In your schematic of the proposed business there, is there any, I didn't see anything on there about how they would store gasoline on site or any other fuel.
Correct. And that was one of the most contentious issues during that Board of Adjustment hearing was the definition of a gasoline service station versus an automobile service station. In essence, there was the definitions were drawn from 2 sources. One was the city code, and the other one was from the OSHA's Department of Labor that just goes into the descriptions of gasoline service stations, as well as Webster's Dictionary of the definition of a gasoline service station.
So there's been no provisions or there's no plans for underground gas tanks or above ground fuel tanks to provide gasoline on a what you would call a business-like basis?
Correct. So the way that the code was interpreted from community development was that just because it states specifically there is a gasoline service station that would be under conditional use, there's the other services rendered. It doesn't say primarily or secondary uses. It says other uses, including oil changes and minor servicing. And I can go back to that definition for you too.
Also, I noticed in the applicant's list of services that they would provide would be like changing of engines and transmissions, which I think would be quite a bit more than oil changing.
Correct, and that was another clarification. And again, once the applicant gets a chance to define those values, I actually took a few notes on that. So that was a point of clarification from one of the Board of Adjustment members talking about scope of services, and from the initial application versus the actual scope of services that the applicant had brought forward, some of those had been changed. Apparently, during the application process, their representative basically grabbed a blanket description of what an automotive service station would be and provided that on the application. During the public hearing process, there was actually clarification. And from that particular video of the archives, the services provided included repair powertrains, general services, repair radiators, gaskets, seal replacements, fuel diagnostics, oil changes, stereo installation repair, alternator removal or replacement, battery replacement, fuel system repairs, scheduled services, repair or replace of exhaust systems and mufflers. And those were the ones that were clarified during that hearing.
So during the hearing, they took off the engine replacement and transmission replacement?
Correct.
Okay.
Let's go down to Walt. Walt, you had...
2 things to follow up, if I may, Mr. Mayor, Jim's comment. There was a formal application made for this. It was signed by the applicant. But at the public hearing, upon questioning about engine replacements, et cetera, it was stated that, well, we didn't really mean that. I mean, effectively, without, I don't mean to be ugly about it, but they just said, yeah, we signed the application, but we didn't fill it out, and that's not really what we're going to do. Okay. Can you go to your next to last slide, I believe it is, please?
Certainly. gone too far.
Okay, down the very last two lines, three lines. A repair shop or an automotive garage would be a permitted or conditional use in other zoning districts, but not in the CB district. Are they allowed in other zoning districts, plural, or allowed in, I thought I read somewhere in the material that they were allowed in industrial zones.
So public garages would be an example of a services similar to this that would be rendered in industrial zones. Permitted zones as far as other gas and service stations without requiring a conditional use permit would include motor business zones.
Okay, so there's two other zones that this could go in without having to go to the Board of Adjustment.
Correct.
Okay. And then, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, continue.
If you would roll back to the picture of the corner club parking.
Certainly.
No, back to the other one, please. I hadn't thought about this till I saw it on the screen. Pedestrian access to that triangle, you have to either go all the way up to the corner club itself, if you're on the west side of Washington and walking up to that triangle, and cross up above the triangle, up north, or I guess you can cross back down closer to City Hall, then cross Second Street, and then cross somewhere else up at First. So my only point to make is that I would hate to see something that would create a constant jaywalk situation in that curve.
Certainly, Mr. Steve.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, it appears that the Board of Adjustments was really concerned about the definition of gas station, service station. If, for example, these people had decided to put in a gas station, would we be having this discussion?
That's speculation. I don't know based off of what the Board of Adjustment may or could have been coming up to a relevant conclusion. There could have been issues with the detailed circulation plan on this site that wouldn't be conducive to the traffic plan. There's all sorts of different parameters that may not make this may or may not make this conductive to a gasoline service
The
station.
reason I ask that, it appears to me that in the turning down of this application by the Board of Adjustment, they spent a lot of time talking about this is not a gas station, and the comprehensive plan and the city codes mention gas stations only. And the city attorney said that this comes close enough, that because they are going to be, what they would like to do would be to offer lubricants and that kind of products that come out of petroleum. So that's the only reason I ask is, you know, are we being asked to judge it on something that is really old? As far as, when I grew up in this town, that's what that was. It was. And not only that, but it was a body shop, so they painted cars in there. And then it became a glass shop. So that particular piece of property has evolved from a lot of different things into what they want to do with it now and what is being done with it in the front half of the building. And I'm still wondering what difference it makes whether it is called an automotive shop or a gas station. And could
Rod, that
somebody
might
tell
be
me?
one for Rod to answer.
Under our code and interpretation, gasoline stations, also you have to sell gasoline or oils or other lubricants. That would almost be like an oil change business would be allowed to conditionally use there. You'd still have to go through the conditional use process to get permitted to do that. So if they were going to charge or try to sell gasoline, that would be another thing that I have to figure whether they could even do it there.
I'm not suggesting that they do, and I'm sure they're not suggesting that they open up a gas station in the back end of that particular building, but as long as the other things that they sell and provide, that does meet the qualification or the definition of gas station.
Yes, and under our code, it says gasoline, sell gasoline or oil, and you're allowed to do other minor repairs.
Now, the way I
That's
just
what-
heard,
that's the
you
issue.
said gasoline or.
Or,
So the gasoline is just as, it would be as irrelevant as anything else, as long as it was or something else.
met one of those qualifications, if it was a lubricant shop or an oil change shop.
Okay?
Thank you.
Walter, you think?
Art,
Art, you got a question? I'll go to
I
Art.
was just going to ask again about the zoning question. You discussed the zones in which a repair shop or auto shop would be allowed by conditional permit. What zone, or no, those were allowed by right.
Correct.
So what other zones is it allowed by conditional use permit?
That's a good question. And there's actually quite a few that would be permitted within that particular location. Bill, maybe you can shed some light,
Bill
some
now?
clarification on
We'll
those.
call on your expertise here, sir.
If I may, I think the only other zoning district where a gasoline or automotive service station is a conditionally permitted use is the general business district.
And by permit,
As conditionally permitted use, correct.
what about motor business zones?
So motor business allows repair shops that are undefined by the code and allows for gasoline stations by right.
Okay, that's what I was after.
Walter?
Following John's question a little bit, Ron, there were 7 criteria on the table before the Board of Adjustment. And in reading the record of that meeting, I was a little puzzled why they didn't have a problem with at least 3 others that, when I read the record, rise to the top for me. Did they take the gasoline definition as just the way to deny this without taking the time and effort to drill down into all of the others? I mean, some of the others talk about noise, dust, vibrations, odors. It's an automobile repair shop, is what it's being described as. Another one, the endanger the public health or safety. There's a letter in the record from Chief Fry saying, I am not in favor of this business at this location, based upon, is in his letter, public health and safety. It talks about being adequately served by existing streets, public facilities, and services, and a third one. And they are needing or feeling a need to reach 2 blocks north and a block southeast to find a place to get off-street parking that's not required, but they apparently felt would be advantageous to present it to the Board of Adjustment. Can you read the minds of the board and tell me why they didn't have a problem with those issues?
Let me throw something in there, Ryan, because the dust and the odor and the noise were addressed in the public hearing, according
That is
to what
correct.
the stuff that we read. But to the other points that Walter had,
If I could read the minds of the Board of Adjustments, it would make my life a lot easier. So unfortunately, I can't read the minds of the Board of Adjustments.
And please don't.
well, the only thing we can do is deal with what we have in front of us,
That's
Ryan.
right.
We
And all of this I just brought up
Yep.
is in the package.
Yep. So
So in regards to that, Mr. Steve, essentially, the Board of Adjustment at any point of time could have put a conditional use on any one of those relevant criterion standards. The relevant criterion standard about generating dust, noise, and debris could have easily been remediated during the construction process for design plan review. They had mentioned talking about using different tools to provide a little less sound to their.
So they recognized it, but could have said it can be
They could have applied a
modified.
conditional,
Okay.
correct, they could have applied a conditional use, sir.
Police Department?
Police department, there was actually a meeting, like I had said, after the initial application had been sent in, that the applicant had clarified, as stated before, the applicant and Chief Fry met the day before the presentation, and they did discuss some of what was brought up between that meeting to the Board of Adjustments after the fact.
Chief Fry did not pull his letter.
Correct.